Class. We have talked so far about what ethics are, or basically what they're not, and how to make ethical decisions. And we know that ethics is a process which flows from your values. So now we're going to talk about next some clearly unethical research. These are actually some famous historical times when science really missed the boat, did some horrible things to people. And while these stories are sort of almost entertaining in a morbid kind of way, they're really horrifying. And with our viewpoint today, we're thinking, how in the world could these people do this kind of research? And what I want you to think about while you're listening to these examples is the fact that these people somehow, at the place and during the time that they did their research, their values were such that they thought this was okay. They thought for some reason that the end justified the means, or that it was the greatest good for the greatest number. So I want you not to look at these like, oh gosh, these are so horrible. I want you to think about them like, oh my gosh, what similarities could we do from our value point today, because we are looking we're looking at things from a narrow perspective of place and time and not on certain absolutes. Because ethical decisions are, by definition, hard. And the scary part is somewhere, somehow, somebody thought these were okay. So here we go. The first one is, I'm sure you've heard of, it's been sort of in the news lately or talked about in light of ethnic minorities being more susceptible to a coronavirus and other similar diseases, and also being less trusting of the vaccines. And this is one of the reasons why. Uh, the Tuskegee syphilis study was very famous now, and it occurred for, get this, uh, 40 years. 40 years that this thing went on before people recognized that it was unethical enough to shut down. Super scary. So what happened here is it was in Tuskegee, which is a Alabama, which is a area in the southern United States. And in 1932, they recruited poor African Americans who had advanced syphilis to be in their trial to study their bad blood. So what the researchers wanted to do was they wanted to, ultimately a very honorable cause, they wanted to find out more about syphilis. But they did it by studying these poor African American men. Then, after it was discovered, a cure for syphilis was discovered, they deliberately did not tell these gentlemen who were in the study. They deliberately left them untreated to see what would happen long term. They wanted to see what happened after syphilis, late stage syphilis, when it had run its course, even when treatments became a variable. So that to me is the most ethical violation. They left them untreated. There were over 400 men and families involved, and the men were not even given informed consent. They were not told what the study was about. Clearly, some definite ethical violations there, which have ramifications today. But at the time, somebody thought it was okay. Another very famous one is the unethical research of the Nazi doctors in the 1940s. In these series of experiments, there was actually a whole part of the Nazi army that gave these types of conducted these types of medical experiments, and they conducted them on prisoners. And they basically did it for medical purposes. They wanted to know all kinds of things about how to conduct war more effectively, how to keep healthy populations healthy, how to age healthy. All kinds of experiments were done by the Nazi doctors. They, they were they tried sterilization, so they wanted to know the best and most painless and effective methods of keeping people from having children's. They modeled battlefield wounds on prisoners. So what they would do is they would shoot prisoners or shoot them with from the air, all different types of ways that, and then they would see how soldiers or battlefield wounds could best be cured. And then they tested physical responses to extreme conditions. They did such things as leave prisoners in freezing water to see how long someone could survive in case one of their pilots got dropped in freezing water. All horrible things like that. And the worst part of those is that they were conducted on prisoners. Prisoners had absolutely no choice. They were obviously chosen, some of them because of that they were Jewish. And despite the fact that these were useful things for mankind to know, the process of doing them on non-volunteer populations is really the main ethical violation. And as a result of these, the Nuremberg Code was developed. It's a code of conduct for research involving human subjects. It was developed after the end of the war, World War II, in 1947. And parts of the Nuremberg Code are what we see today in the ethical conduct of psychologists, the APA, ethical code. There's ethical code for NIH, the National Institutes of Health. Many of the ethical principles that we know today resulted from these original trials. Oops. Another case is relatively recent. There was a doctor at Children's Hospital in Boston, and I think he's super creepy looking. His name is Dick Van Velzen, and he was an expert in crib death. So to some extent, he was doing a positive thing. His research was oriented toward preventing children from dying in their cribs, infants from all different ways they can roll over and suffocate, all types of things. So he was an expert in crib death. But his ethical violation is that he was found to have organs from about 805 children without appropriate permission. So what he would do is when he was notified of a baby who died of crib death, he would perform the autopsy, and without even asking the parents or any of the relatives, he would harvest the organs to keep for further study. So obviously, if you think about it, many people's religious and cultural beliefs. I just talked to a Native Hawaiian friend the other day, and I found out that she had lost a baby. She had had a miscarriage while she was pregnant, and she still talks as if that baby is part of her family. And when you think of the acts that this doctor did to babies without their parents' permission is just heinous. Some cultures might have said, it's okay, I'd like to help science, but many cultures would not. And this doctor did not even ask for any type of permission. So that's another example of unethical research. I guess in his mind, he thought that the ends justified the mean. So that's Dick Van Velzen. And he was an expert in crib death. Darn it, why do I keep doing that? All right, another one, and this is another one that I think is really, really timely. There was a British, what kind of medical doctor he was, named Andrew Wakefield, and this is fairly current. It's been going on, and I think the repercussions of his case are still going. He wrote a famous paper linking autism and vaccinations. And as you, I'm sure, are aware of, many, many parents do not want to vaccinate their children because of the publicity surrounding his paper. There is a lot of celebrity support for this, a lot of natural health support for this, but it's all based on a fake paper. So this guy just wanted to be famous. There was a 2-year investigation, one of many. One ended in May 2010 and found him guilty of conflict of interest. So he received money from a lawyer who wanted to represent the victims of vaccines. These are people that claimed that their children got autism because of vaccines. And then he set up a company to personally profit from, to test market the vaccines. So he had definitely a vested interest in making sure that people thought there was a link between autism and vaccinations. But what he did was he had highly selective reporting of the data. So when he chose a sample, let's say that he did a sample of archival data. So we got data from hospitals on all the children who were, our data from doctors on all the children who were diagnosed with autism. And then he threw out a lot of the data where the kids didn't get autism. So he had some reason, he would say, well, this one didn't work because they received a different vaccine, or this one he wouldn't take because the parents were had high socioeconomic status, or they had something in the family, or he made up all these different ways to skew his sample. So he cherry picked it to make it look like the vaccines caused autism. And the investigation in May 2010 involved a lot of experts looking over his records and looking over his studies and demonstrating that that's how he did it. He also had unethical dealings with children. He did things without informed consent, or he asked the children for consent and didn't get their parents, all kinds of things like that. So this example I really like. This is just flat out unethical. It's a different type of unethical that we've talked about before. This guy did it purely for profit. So from that, I want to talk about the different types of misconduct we have. Ethical misconduct isn't always like Andrew Wakefield. It's not always based on some evil person trying to make money. Sometimes it is people who maybe really believe they're doing the right thing. Maybe those Tuskegee researchers believed that the sacrifice of those 400 men in Alabama was worth saving a world full of people from syphilis. I don't think so. I think it was taking care of disadvantaged population, but some people might have think that. So there's 4 different types. The first type is distorting scientific knowledge. It can be fabrication, reporting on non-existent data. People have been known to fake their data. And then it could be falsification, selective reporting of data, and that's what Andrew Wakefield did. It also can be misleading the scientific community. Authorship, plagiarism, that is a huge ethical conduct violation that I want to make sure I take very seriously and that you do not do on your projects. There are also such things as guest authors. Those are people authors will put on a study to give them prestige. So they'll take someone super famous, like let's say that Jean Piaget were alive, and I'd call him up and I'd say, hey, Jean, you want to be on my study? I really want to have your name on it because I know if Jean Piaget is on my study, everyone will want to read it, especially if they think that he's not alive. Okay. Anyway, it's putting someone on your study that was not even on their study. They say, yeah, I'll be on your study, but they don't know about it, or they weren't part of the thought process and the work that went into. And then there's also ghost authors. And ghost authorship is something that you should be particularly aware of if you want to go to graduate school, because it does happen occasionally. Most of my colleagues are really, really good about giving students credit, but some places professors are not so good, and that's the people that make their graduate students or other students do all the work and do not give them credit. They don't give the students credit for it. So those are ghost authors. It's like, think of them writing, but they're ghosted. They're not even on the article. Duplicate publication. People will sometimes alter the details a little bit and publish the same study twice in 2 different journals. And that's bad, obviously, because if someone wanted to do a meta-analysis, they would be double counting their data, or it's just not good representation of your work. And then there's also abuse of the peer review process. You might have heard, and I think I told you about that book I read that I'm fascinated called Fossil Men. And part of the problem with these anthropologists was that the team that found the older fossils wasn't really well liked by the rest of the field. Everybody thought that the guy was a jerk, which he was kind of, but they ignored his research, and when they peer reviewed his articles, they always made sure they got rejected because they didn't like him and his ideas. And that's not good, even if somebody is a jerk. And in this case, the guy had some amazing ideas that were borne out over time. And the progress of the field was hindered because the peer reviewers rejected him. They abused the peer review process to punish an individual instead of thinking objectively and about science. The next type is misuse and abuse of human subjects, and that's what we've been talking about a lot so far. There are consent issues. You don't ask someone for consent, or you don't ask someone appropriately for consent. As you're going to find out in a couple minutes, there are experts that look over your consent forms to make sure they're okay. Related to the consent issues, there's also something called consent and assent. That's assent, A-S-S-E-N-T. And consent is a legal term, and you legally can only consent to participate in research if you're over 18. So if a minor is participating in a research project, and sometimes that's important because we want to know about characteristics about children as well. If a minor is participating in a research, their parent or guardian must give legal consent, but the children must also give, I don't want to say illegal, they want to give assent. So even though they're not old enough to legally give consent, they should be informed about the research as much as possible and ask to sign something or to say, yes, I do want to participate, because that's important as well. And that's part of consent issues, letting minors consent in an age-appropriate way. Another misuse and abuse is in exploitation issues. And our dear friend, Dr. Wakefield, was a good example of financial exploitation. And then a fourth time, which can be really difficult and it can affect all research, is poor record keeping, including failure to obtain IRB approval. And IRB we're going to talk about in a minute, but it's basically just a board that approves research. So if you forget to obtain IRB approval, that can be a serious ethical abuse. And in some cases, entire universities' licenses have been taken away because researchers did not obtain approval of their procedures. And so now that we've covered that, let's take a little break, and I will come back and explain to you what IRB means and what IRB procedures are and how you get approval. So I'll see you back in a little bit.